Unfortunately, a lot of people with borderline personality disorder experience intense and chronic shame, which is a self-conscious emotion which makes us experience a lot of feelings of worthlessness, self-loathing, even disgust towards ourselves. And shame can also increase the likelihood of self-harm and suicidal ideation, which makes BPD that much more complicated. So today I want to focus on shame and BPD and how to help with it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Kayla and I release new videos every Monday about all things BPD. So if that sounds good to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below as well as the bell notification up top. Now, as you guessed from the intro, the title of my video and everything else, we are talking about shame. Shame, and BPD. This is something that I definitely struggle with a lot, and I know that a lot of you who also have BPD, there's a lot of people who actually wrote to me asking me to make a video about this topic because it's such a common experience. It's a common experience regardless of if you have BPD or not. I just really think that it's amplified by the disorder because there's a tendency to blame ourselves for everything because we don't feel as though fundamentally we're good enough or we're worthy. And so I wanted to make a video specific to shame to help us understand where does this come from, what is shame, and what do we do about it if we do suffer from it in addition to BPD. So let's firstly start by defining what shame is. I'm going to read the definition by Brené Brown just because I think that she did an amazing job at really pulling together the essence of shame. And so here we go. Shame, according to Brené Brown, is intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. I couldn't have said that better myself. I really think that that sums up the experience of shame itself. And shame is a very self-conscious emotion, meaning that it's attributing a sense of badness or being flawed to ourselves. Guilt is I did something bad versus shame is I am bad. So there's a big difference because one of them is indicating, okay, maybe one of the actions that I took was not the best thought out, but that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, and it actually makes us more likely to change that thing. Versus when we get stuck in the shame cycle, we believe that we are fundamentally bad, that there's something wrong with us, and so it doesn't propel us to change. It doesn't help in building sustainable relationships because we're so focused on ourselves rather than the things that are happening. And so you might be wondering, well, why the hell would shame exist, right? What is the function? Evolutionary speaking, shame allows us to keep ourselves in check. If we think about our ancestors, okay, where the living conditions were extremely difficult and volatile, if you really were kicked out from the group, if you lived on your own, your chance of survival would essentially be zero, okay? And so shame becomes this thing that allows us to use social comparison and feelings to keep our behavior in check, to ensure that we're not kicked out from the tribe, because if we're kicked out, then we're probably going to die. That is essentially what shame is, how it makes sense when we think about the evolution of the human species. And shame can show up in many different forms and for many different reasons. It might show up for you because you are being judged inaccurately on your values or your beliefs. You might feel shame for needing help or asking for something. You might feel shame for other emotions that you're experiencing. We might feel shamed when we're rejected, whether truly or perceived by others. And so there's no right or wrong way when we should or shouldn't experience shame. I think that it's just one of those things that, depending on the cues that we picked up growing up, so the messaging that we derived from our interpersonal environment, that leads us to develop these beliefs about ourselves, about the world. And oftentimes when we are confronted or those beliefs are challenged, shame will come into play to bring us back towards those beliefs so that we stay anchored in that. For example, that was a bit of a not very clear way of saying it, but for example, if you grew up in a household where you had to be really strong all the time and keep all your feelings inside, and every time that you were sad or something, you were met with rejection, then it would make sense as an adult that every time that you have uncomfortable feelings come up, you feel shame about them, because if you were to share them with others, there's potential rejection from the group. And so shame keeps you in check to be like, hey, hold on a second, we're going to internalize everything as we did, because if we externalize the feelings, we're going to get rejected and cut out from the group. So where does BPD come into this whole question about shame? There has been many, many, many studies that have been done on BPD and the experience of shame. And so much so that researchers actually believe that, fundamentally speaking, shame is a core experience of those who have BPD. There was a study done in 2007 that compared women who had BPD and PTSD versus women who only had BPD and their experience of shame. And what they found was that the women who had both BPD and PTSD were not more prone to shame than the women who only had BPD, meaning that shame appears to be an experience of BPD alone, separate from comorbid disorders, which often fall with BPD, because there's a lot of overlap between anxiety, depression, PTSD, other mental disorders that come with BPD. But there appears to be a link at the core level between the experience of shame and borderline personality disorder. I think that with BPD, there's this tendency to be hypersensitive to everything, to be self-deprecating towards yourself, to fear this abandonment. And so the tendency to feel shame would be that much more stronger, because there's an increased fear of being ostracized and abandoned by others. And so it would make sense, given what we know about evolutionary function of shame, about BPD itself, and the experience that people often encounter. With BPD, we also see this tendency to experience splitting or dissociation when we do experience shame. We might fall into this black or white pattern of thinking where we separate ourselves and we become all bad or all good. This contributes to that. We also see more dissociative symptoms where you might be experiencing the shame so intensely that you dissociate from your body, you don't recognize yourself, you don't recognize your environment. And those can be really, really scary experiences. So if we do experience some of those things, whether that's splitting, dissociation, shame spirals, or whatever, how shame shows up in your life with BPD, what do we do about it? First thing is to name and recognize it. For those of you who watched the Gremlins movie, if you remember that movie where the little Furbies or whatever that they were called were all cute and fun, and during the day when there was light, and as soon as things got dark, they became these really scary monsters and gremlins. And so this is what shame does as well. The more that we keep shame in the dark, the more that what was something initially manageable, a little Furby, becomes this scary, big, disgusting monster and gremlin. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more that we ignore it. And so a simple practice is the mere practice of recognizing the shame gremlins and naming them and saying it out loud. I'm experiencing shame for this. You would be surprised at how effective that really simple practice is. Just naming the feeling, naming the experience, and bringing awareness to it is turning the light on those gremlins to help them become the Furbies that are manageable, that are somewhat cute, that we can hold and see them for what they are. Second thing I would recommend is self-compassion. I talk a lot about self-compassion on my channel because it has helped me profoundly in my own healing journey, and I think that self-compassion is a great tool for shame. Shame is a tricky emotion because what happens is that it puts a spotlight on us and we then forget about the rest of the world. It feels like we're a bad person, we're the only thing that matters. It's very egocentric. And so self-compassion helps to spread the spotlight onto everyone else who's also in the arena, in the stadium, suffering with us. It helps to remind us of common humanity which is to say that we are not the only ones suffering, and others in the same moments in time are experiencing suffering from shame as well. And it helps to normalize the feelings. It helps to not make us feel so alone, and to take away this egocentric I perspective from the shame and move it to a collective we suffer as a human species. Lastly, something else that you could do would be the DBT skill of checking the facts. Checking the facts, essentially it's naming the emotion and ranking it from 0 to 10. Once you do that, then you go through, okay, what are the actual facts that you observe? What are the assumptions and judgments you're making based on the things that you're seeing? What is the probability of the worst case scenario happening? And if it did happen, how would you deal with it? And at the end, you reassess the intensity of the emotion to see, okay, is it really shame 10 out of 10 based on the real facts of life? Or is it more that it's more accurate to say that it could be a guilt, a 2 out of 10. And so I'll put a PDF or a link to PDF in the show notes down below for those of you who are interested. I'll also link all the research that I consulted based on BPD and Shame. For those of you who are curious to do more investigation and reading on your own, I know that I like to read and check those things out. So hopefully for some of you, that would be a good tool. As a whole, that was a brief overview about shame in relation to BPD, but I'm always curious to hear from you if you have more specific questions pertaining to the topic, what your experiences are with shame with BPD, how you deal with them. That's my favorite thing, is when you all share tools to help you in your life, concrete things that not only myself, but everyone else in our community could benefit from those things. So on that note, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next time for another episode of On the Line.